Alrighty, I'm here with Colby Haverkamp. He is the VP of Growth and Partnerships for Howser Roofing. Colby, thanks for coming on. Let's start with an overview of your career, and then how you got involved with Howser, and then we'll go from there.
Yeah, definitely. Excited to be here. Thanks for having me on, Garrett. Yeah, I'm a bit of a, I guess, enigma, anomaly, however you want to categorize it. I'm somebody that first exposure to construction, dating myself here, was probably 15 years ago. Worked as a stonemason laborer, kind of growing up in the Topeka area way back when. As summers ended and we got into college, I kind of stepped away from that industry, spent time on and off in tech for about 10 years, did a stint with the federal government, helped a number of kind of tech startups, and then eventually found myself back in this space through a good friend of mine who kind of stayed the course, went to K-State, got a construction management degree, stayed in the roofing industry, and eventually started his own business about a little over 5 years ago at this point. So, um, just stemmed from a conversation of us on a trip together, talking about what his plans were for the future, and actually, led to a role that he'd been, I guess, dreaming up for a while.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about the stint in sort of outside the trade space. I'm curious about that. So you were in a little bit of tech, it sounded like.
Hmm.
Sort of
Yeah,
different fields outside of it. I'm curious. I mean, it makes sense kind of how you got brought back in with the relationship with the friend, but anything, tell me a little bit about that stint, and then anything that you learned that you were able to come in and apply to this industry. I'm sure there's tons, especially when you have sort of tech, which is very modern day,
yeah.
all sorts of different strategies versus the trades, which oftentimes can be sort of archaic, if you will.
Yeah, I think I've operated in a number of tech spaces, so also kind of unique there. My start was in GovTech, which is like also taking an industry that has no tech exposure and trying to bring it up to speed. And we did everything from simple website upgrades to a little more sophisticated, like mass notifications for emergency settings in areas or um, 311 stuff, Parks and Rec, kind of everything that would fall under the purview of a municipality was kind of where I got my start. And I did a lot of BD work there, which eventually bled into kind of startups that were focused around like data democratization and kind of um, putting data in the hands of people for good, I guess. And then eventually went totally another direction and did things in the um, human capital management software space, which is a whole different animal, but also did find myself selling to construction companies there. So a little bit of the connectivity was there are 1.5 million solutions in tech. There are tech solutions that are sold to people in tech specifically. And having stepped away from it now, I just see that there's a massive amount of unnecessary solutions that are in those spaces. But at the same time, when you step into something like construction, you can look at it a little more objectively and say, okay, there are actually some gaps here that would definitely apply. What are those solutions that we were seeing at the time or that I was using as someone in tech selling to others that I could actually implement that would help us? So it's nice in a way because it's you're not having, I don't know, if you come into a space that doesn't have as much noise, you get to kind of pick and choose what actually makes sense for you, rather than just being bombarded with like, here's 15 solutions and we expect you to use them in your day to day.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, it's kind of a similar thing in my scenario where we had sort of this phase where we were selling technology to insurance brokers, which again, very archaic, moves very slow, that entire industry. And having the insight of sort of all the different options, right? There's a million different things you could build for a broker, but what are the things that are actually going to pull the lever and actually make a difference has helped us where now we're in the position where we're operating one, we know what's actually going to make a difference. And when we also have the ability to sometimes build and implement it ourselves. So I just think that whole idea of coming from a space where you know all about tech and then getting into a space that doesn't use tech gives you a pretty big advantage. But let's dive into your exact title, growth and partnerships. This is something that I haven't necessarily seen in a trades business. What does the title mean for you? What was kind of the need that you were talking about with the founder, and why did they bring you in?
Yeah, I think out of the gate, so we're headquartered just outside Topeka, a small town in that region, kind of where we initially grew up. He had really taken the Topeka, Lawrence, Manhattan market by storm and kind of had those and was feeling pretty good. And I think Kansas City was just a much larger undertaking. Knew it was a tight market, knew it was very relationship driven, more so than even other, larger metros that perhaps we had operated in. Via storm chasing or some other capacity. And so we just had a long discussion about what we envisioned that looking like. Um, what the initial role was set out to be was really develop those relationships, get our growth specifically in and around Kansas City, and that will probably lead to more work throughout the larger Midwest region. Um, it definitely has been that, but as I've grown in my role and kind of the capacity here too, I've taken on a number of other things that probably aren't encompassed by that title. But I think the main point was uh, grow us as a business through um, direct channels, which makes sense, which would be go to your general contractors, those sort of things. But what are the underlying ways that we can have partnerships too? And maybe you should you have full autonomy to go decide where you spend your time on, and if it will lead to returns for us. And so I think for me, that's been the really interesting thing is I'm someone that almost always takes a meeting, even if it's not obvious that it'll result in something for us. But usually that has, I don't know, played out in our favor and been positive overall.
All right, let's talk a little bit more about that then. What are some of those other roles, areas you found yourself in? I'm guessing it's probably on sort of this technology streamlining processes side of things. Could be wrong, but what is the other stuff that gets you excited?
Yeah, I think for me, something that doesn't necessarily lead to direct dollars for us as a business was developing like a trade Rolodex of groups, but I think it's something that everybody should have. So I've got groups that are HVACs, that are, electricians, that are plumbing, that are framers, that are, you name it. We've gone and kind of tried to vet those, and it's really different market by market because you may have groups that don't want to travel or have a good, hold in Lawrence or Topeka, but they don't really decide to venture into Kansas City. So it did really feel like starting at square one. And that's one where, like I said, does it necessarily translate to direct growth for us? Probably not. But when there is a partner that's asking for those things and I've got someone reliable that I can flip over to them, then that makes us a trusted partner long term. So that's one for me that's just top of mind, continues to be top of mind because it's kind of um, we have to constantly be having those discussions with those groups. But yeah, definitely just thinking about bandwidth for our founder, me looking into tech solutions, or really any system for the company and saying, this is crap, we'll never use this, or this is actually worthwhile, let's take another meeting. And then, kind of filtering those out to the ones that actually make sense for us has been, hopefully really helpful to him. I think he would say that.
What is worthwhile? So you've kind of taken all these meetings, you've looked at the solutions. If you could kind of boil it down to two or three of maybe a technology, a process, what has made the most impact for you guys, or maybe what do you see the opportunity is?
Um, he's done a really good job of making tight relationships with suppliers and various vendors and has just been kind of married to those historically. So even just my willingness to maybe line up the next 2 to 3 options if things were to ever go sideways, or just to give us general flexibility. So there are some groups who also are married to specific suppliers that maybe we don't have a certification with, or they would really like us to plug into their Procore solution, let's say. We have no exposure to that, upon me arriving here. Just gaining familiarity with those things, even if we don't use them, or knowing, hey, down the road, we're going to need X bonding capacity, X amount of insurance. We really like our insurance provider today, but if, you know, everything goes sideways, worst case scenario, who is the next best group we could call, or who's somebody that we could talk to about this?
Hmm.
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay, so I want to talk about something that you posted a while back about this trend of buying boring businesses, right? There's all sorts of noise out there about Main Street, buying businesses, seller financing, all of that stuff. But your point was very interesting in that if you're going and acquiring a company like a roofing company or an HVAC company and you have no idea what you're doing, that might not be the best idea. Can you elaborate on sort of your thought process around this whole trend?
Yeah, I think if I'm remembering it right, I put something out that like 96% of commercial roofers fail in the first 5 years, which is still an accurate SBA statistic. And I think buying boring businesses has quickly become, the sexy term thrown around by people on nearly every social media platform, as well as just like the random email blasts that you see continuously of like possible buys. I think what people don't account for is it's great if you're a finance mind or a marketing mind and you can, slap new systems and solutions onto these. But if you're not somebody that's willing to roll up your sleeves and probably be in the field for, call it 5 to 6 months, especially with a commercial business, I think you're in for a rude awakening, especially if you don't retain employees, especially if you don't have transfer of kind of like what that owner has built over time. I don't think the model is a bad thing. I just think how people are going about it is, I don't know, not always correct. But it's definitely something that's been really intriguing to us because they're not wrong. There are baby boomers and people that are exiting in droves or looking to sell their businesses. Some are just closing them down without ever transferring an asset because a family member doesn't want to grab it or nobody wants to hang on to it or has any interest. So there are definitely viable options out there. I think my caveat suggestion to everybody would be just look long and hard at what you're doing. It would look a lot different, maybe buying a successful residential roofing business versus something at the commercial level. But this is all just kind of industry specific. It also, the underlying theme of all this is like so many of these businesses are name associated. Even if you leave the name on them and those people are gone and the relationships go with them, what does that business look like? Can you sustain? Can you survive?
That's yeah, that's an interesting point in terms of when you're like underwriting a deal, looking at that aspect of the asset, right? How much of the value of this business is tied up in the specific relationship that customers have or partners have with the current owner? That's definitely something people probably aren't considering, right? When you think about the current influencers, everything talks about top line, bottom line, and it's all sort of money based. And you can underwrite a deal great on that, but you're not considering in all these other factors that really play a role in the success of the business. So that's a great point there. You mentioned
And I think
96. Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, I was just gonna say the other thing I'd mention is like I think the marketing statistics in these, especially the trade sectors, are extremely skewed. So like we get information all the time. Like I have people blast me that are like, we can generate 300 leads in Silver Lake, Kansas, where you're based. And I'm like, you obviously don't know how big that town is. We would see 300 leads there in 10 years probably. So like it is, I think. I don't know. It's super intriguing. It's probably worth a longer discussion, but as like my owner and I have talked about it, if he could do it all over again, he'd probably strip the name off of it, making it something more general that could be easily passed on if and when that situation arises that like perhaps his sons, daughters don't want to take it over or some other family member, that it could be easily transferred. I'd love to buy a business with somebody else's name on it if I knew I could live up to that quality or whatever it is that's made them successful.
Right. And then just the kind of final note on this, the other roofing company I was speaking with, they did a seller financing deal, but the key to it was the current owner is staying on for a decent amount of time. And
Yeah.
having that transfer of knowledge is completely key because like you said, roofing, you can't just step on a roof and put it together at day one. So if you're looking at that opportunity, bake into the deal somehow that there's going to be a 1 to 2 year period where the previous owner is still on board in some sort of capacity, transferring all that knowledge and all the relationships over. Um, you mentioned 96% of roofers fail in the first year or 2 years, whatever that time frame was. Why do you think that is? What are if you could kind of boil it down? Why do you think most roofers fail?
So specific to the commercial space, I think the high bullet point would be groups get large too fast if they have some degree of success, and they probably don't stay lean enough to weather hard times or changes in the market. That would be my short answer. The longer would be that um, I don't know. I think for better or worse, and it's not specific to roofing, some of the groups that have success here are just not savvy enough on particular topics. So they either don't make the right hires or they continue to operate in the way that they always have, which was fine for the first 5 or 6 projects, but then you find yourself on larger and larger projects, and mistakes can compile. So I think that's also worth mentioning as we talk about like differences between residential and commercial. You make one mistake, you might be worst case scenario on a residential roof out a few $1,000s. You make a massive mistake on a commercial project, you could be on the hook for hundreds of thousands potentially. So. Uh, it's just bigger numbers, like anything else, big risk, big reward. But at the same time, um, it does get some people if they're not paying attention.
Hmm. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about growth specifically. Obviously, that's in your title, like we talked about. If you could look at the term growth and kind of boil it down for a trades business into 2 to 3 levers that you could pull, right? You only have a few options. These are the things you have to focus on for specifically growth. What would that be?
I think my answer is going to be different than most people, but I think for true growth to happen, your quality of production has to be top notch. The growth is not going to happen if you can't point at something or point at examples and say, this is the social proof, this is what we've done. Um, I think remaining as lean as possible until you cannot take it anymore and you're bashing your head into the wall is key too. I think you'll know when that point is that you can pull the next levers on adding more people, digging into the margins a little bit further. Uh, and then I guess a little more like non-standard answer would just be pride, not having any. So at the end of the day, you have to be able to um, you have to be able to say no to people, or you're not going to survive in this. You have to say no, this isn't us, or we're not ready for it, even though that
Mm,
sucks. You want to say yes. Um, in the long term, you'll grow faster. But also, having pride in your work because as you get into these larger spaces, if you allow people to push you around, they'll ask you to do anything. And if you say yes to everything, uh, you quickly can find yourself in a bad spot. So ultimately, that's something I'm pretty proud of with our owner is like he's somebody that um, frequently says no, even when he doesn't want to. And I think that the positive gains from doing that and just being honest with people about what he would do or who he would recommend to handle it until we're ready has led to more gains for us over time. And then the last thing, just being authentic connectivity. There's a lot of people that do this growth partnerships thing that show up at the meetings and the happy hours and networking events and shake hands and don't really actually have anything happen. Like I don't know, showing that you genuinely care is going to lead to massive growth results over any marketing-led effort, in my opinion.
mm. So now let's talk about the other side of it, partnerships. What are the partnerships that you focus on? You mentioned GCs, you mentioned sort of construction businesses. I mentioned real estate agents earlier. But for a roofing business, what are the partnerships that you need to go and find?
Yeah, it's obviously a mix of everything. We don't know what we don't know. So, in my first, I'm like a year and a half into this role formally. In my first year, I just hammered the GC market really, really hard because I thought that's what we needed to do, which is fine. You need it. It should be a path or avenue that you have built in. But the flip side is anybody and everybody can bid on a GC publication usually. So even though you have those relationships, the majority of them, until you've done a few projects with them, are going to take low bid. So, my recommendation would be anybody starting out, spend more time with property management groups, spend more time with um, private commercial property owners. Definitely talk to real estate agents whenever you can. Insurance brokers are not a bad, but the ones where I'll be spending the next 12 months hitting it a lot harder than I did previously, and that I'm already doing is property management groups and just private commercial owners, which are not easy to stumble upon because everybody's trying to sell them something. Everybody's got an underlying motive that they're trying to make happen. And when you get in the room with people that own private property or large private commercial property, you can imagine they've been bombarded by everything. So there's a delicate dance and walk to that. But um, I think having multiple avenues opened up is key for us. We may even take a swing at stuff like the federal space, just having all those avenues open. So if and when something shuts down or ceases to exist, we've still got work.
Hmm. Let's talk about that delicate dance that you mentioned. This is, I mean, in any business, right? There is the struggle of you're trying to get in contact with people, but so is every single other person out there. Their
Right.
LinkedIn, their email inbox is full of the same exact message. I'm curious, just, I mean, what is your strategy for that? How do you kind of overcome that and actually get to the point where you're sitting and talking to somebody?
In-person connects have been good for me, and this is a total, 180 from where I was historically. I sold like this in tech for 8 to 9 years, so getting back in person was not a bad thing for me. I still have plenty of these days where I work from home and I give people calls, but like my days of cold calling have dropped significantly, especially focusing on Kansas City because it is a big small city, and I've just found that like we're not going to do anything with hardly anybody without shaking a hand at least once. And so finding those super connectors is huge. I try to be one myself where I'm constantly helping people, even though, I'm not expecting anything in return. And then usually that reverberates in a good way. So um, I do a lot of one-on-one coffees whenever I can get them. I show up to networking events that I feel I should be at or that we've got good key partners at. But I've kind of gone old school in this, and so far it seems to be working better than a lot of the other things we were trying.
And where are you, like specifically, where are you looking? Are you looking on LinkedIn? What kind of platforms are you using to find the right people, just from a tactical perspective?
Yeah, LinkedIn's been pretty heavy usage for me. I think I can at least connect the dots that way. And then I would say professional organizations, there are a million, like there are in every city and nationally. And there are a million that will waste your time. You kind of have to kiss a lot of frogs to figure out which, 4 to 5 you want to be deeply involved with. And I think once you do that, um, then it becomes more clear. And as you build those relationships within those, people refer you to others, people refer you to others, and it becomes quite a bit easier. It's the same thing we did in the GC market though. I didn't go meet 40 GCs to work with 40 GCs. I went to meet 40 so I could find the 6 to 7 that we want to work with specifically.
Hmm. Yeah. Okay, let's talk about commercial versus residential a little bit. What are the trade-offs, challenges that come with each side of roofing when it's commercial and residential? And how do you guys think about where you want to put your focus?
Yeah, I think everybody has different opinions on this. I think even internally, if you ask people at our company, they'd have different opinions on this. But I think if you're looking at it at a macro level, uh, residential is great from the perspective of you can knock it out fast. The margins are typically better, especially from an insurance perspective. Um, you're in and out, like the issues are typically less problematic. That being said, on the flip side, residential homeowners are a beast in and of themselves. You could have 10 really positive experiences, but 1 to 2 could make you want to rip your hair out. So just think about, how people care about specific homes. You're going to run into all sorts of eccentricities. I think not dealing with that on the commercial side, even though we run into problems and we've had, shout downs with various supers at job sites, it rarely reaches the point of like non-understanding that we see on the residential side, which is like people trying to get more money out of you or not pay. Whereas commercials, like we've seen this before, we understand this is a problem. How can we work through it together? And then it's just volume play, right? Like it still probably takes 10 regular size residentials to hit what a regular commercial size job would do. So there's definitely pros and cons to both. And I think some days we would prefer the other, and then other days we prefer the other. So we're a shop though that's probably 85% commercial and growing. We've found that our residential footprint continues to be better by not door knocking, not storm chasing, and just having those leads come into us kind of organically, mostly through a referral basis. Um, it's probably also increased the quality of the residential that we're doing. So we do a lot of custom homes now via groups that focus on kind of high-end homes. So the referral mechanisms work pretty great. Um, but yeah, I think you could argue for both. The only other thing I'd say is like the residential market is really crowded, like it is with most other trades. So you could throw a rock and hit a residential roofer, probably from where I sit right now. Whereas commercial, we see probably the same 6 to 7, at least in this market.
Right. So another thing I would have to think comes into play with the commercial side is just the recurring aspect of it, where when you're looking at residential, like I mentioned, someone's building their or putting a new roof on not too often, right? This isn't something you go shopping for every week, every weekend. Whereas commercial, you have with the right partnership a little bit more recurring revenue. Does that sort of play into the factor as well of which one to value more?
Yeah, I would say it's just less relationships to maintain, right? Like you can
Mm.
dig a little deeper with people and they respect you and they're going to continue to feed you work as long as you're doing a good job. So yeah, that absolutely plays a large part in it.
You mentioned the crowded market as well, on the residential side. How do you guys stand out? Because it is objectively very crowded market, but so are most markets. What is your approach for standing out? So when someone thinks of their roof, they think of you.
Um, Probably a couple things. As I mentioned, like we've just found that kind of removing the door knocking entirely has been kind of brand. I just can't tell you how many people associate that with roofing and absolutely hate it. And like immediately shut down working with anybody that does that. So pulling back on that from where we started historically as a residential heavy group. Um, and then I think just often taking the time to do what most people would call kind of quote unquote annoying things. We're not typically going to take on another trade's massive portion of a project on a commercial project, but for residential, if somebody needs a piece of metal bent or fixed, or they're having problems with the chimney, or they're having problems with relatively anything else associated with their house, they will often ask us for help. And if we have um, we feel like we can handle it appropriately and fix something for them, that usually goes a long way. So, my owner's always been really great about that too. He's that type of person that's gonna like, okay, you live down the street and we did your roof and oh, you're having an issue with something totally separate. Yeah, I'm happy to help you figure that out. So.
Hmm. The lack of door knocking is interesting to me because again, going back to like what do you see on TikTok, right? Window washing is a big one where there's all these viral clips of someone knocking on the door. Hey, I'm in the area. Talk a little bit more about that and stepping away from that. I mean, is it more just a brand thing? It might not directly, obviously, if you're not knocking on any doors, you're not going to get any leads from that. But is it a brand thing? What is the thought process behind that?
I think at this point, it's better for our brand. There are people that are really good at navigating it, and frankly, it's hard to keep those people on staff. Like
Mm.
it's a grueling position. I knocked doors and painted residential houses way back when, so like I know how hard that is. There's probably no harder initial BD sales role that kind of exists out there. So, um, but yeah, I think we have fortunately reached the place as a company where like it's not necessary, and we feel like the bad outweighs the good from doing so. From a brand perspective, we just pretty much pulled back completely.
What would you say is the biggest bottleneck just for your specific company? And then we'll talk about okay, like as an industry as a whole, where's the bottlenecks? But for you guys specifically, what's the biggest bottleneck for you?
Leadership bandwidth, absolutely. I think we uh, so much still sits on our owner, even though I take pieces away from him every day and encourage him that like this is what I'm here for is to continue to take pieces and delegate it out to the other people that we've hired that are really qualified to do what we brought them on board to do. And so I think it's just flipping the script on how we've historically operated versus where we want to be long term as we grow. And just kind of knowing that we can't continue to do so at an efficient level or from a sanity level if he keeps at the pace that he is right now. And that also kind of goes hand in hand with systems. So as much as maybe things work great today, we'll either get outpaced or um, I don't know, outgained by groups that implement systems that save them time and money.
And that it ties back into what we were talking about earlier about being able to, or it was the tips for growth, right? You mentioned quality of work, staying lean, and pride, having it and not having it in certain situations. But the leanness, you said, okay, we'll push into the level where you're banging your head against the wall and then take the next step. So it sounds like you're kind of at that point right now.
Yeah, and it's like it's double-edged because I feel like I'm saying two things here is like we need to take things off certain people's plates and put them on others. But at the same time, we have this revolving conversation around like even if we hire the best people in the world, do they care as much as we do at an
Mm,
ownership level? Because nobody's going to care about it more than us. So it's yeah, I don't know, clone ourselves. We're trying to figure out how to like continue to replicate that, but also like stay as lean as we possibly can. Because frankly, that's been a big reason why we've had success. It's like we've stayed lean as a team. We know that the quality will be good because we know the people we're working with, but also everybody internally, we know them really well. We can make sure that they continue to be compensated correctly, make sure that they continue to be happy with what they're doing versus kind of losing it in the side of managing many, many more employees.
right. And I mean, this is the issue with every business, right? Where you get to the point where it's okay, I need somebody else. But like you said, they're not going to care as much as I care because they're not an owner in the company. So it's just interesting to see how the same thing comes up in every conversation. How you fix it, there's a lot of different thoughts on that, right? Having a good hiring practice, making sure you're asking the right questions. I heard something the other day from Alex Hormozy, which was about putting in how do you basically bring together a group of entrepreneurs, and that the success of a business is directly correlated to how many quote unquote entrepreneurs are inside of that business, right? If you have one, maybe it's a $2 million company. If you have five, maybe it's a $10 million company because they treat their job like they sort of own that role. Their ownership and their entrepreneurship is the role that they have. So, what the answer is, there's a million ways you could go about it, but I think one thing everyone probably realizes is how do you get more entrepreneurial people inside of your business? Um, in terms of the industry bottlenecks, does anything come to mind there as a whole industry? What is kind of either slowing it down or maybe a trend that's lifting it up? Anything come to mind?
Um, I think the slowdown we've seen is just often around general regulation. I don't really know how you undo that,
Mm,
but we've seen probably overkill on the regulatory side, which is fine. Like we understand why some groups, you know, specifically act that way, as well as like why at the governance level those things need to happen to keep everybody safe. But at the same time, like um, yeah, we see huge bottlenecks too from just design phases. So frankly, like architects who are out of tune with how things actually work in the construction space or suggestions on models that are very, very expensive compared to alternatives that would make a lot more sense for the client and everybody else involved to basically do the same thing. So that's kind of something that we constantly kind of battle with and push back on. I also think right now the huge bottleneck we're seeing is like a ton of companies just trying to survive. So you're seeing really, really low bids in the competitive bid space just because groups are trying to cash flow and keep themselves alive. So I expect like a contraction in the market, not only at the trade level, but at the, general contractor level. Uh, Probably in other metros, I can speak for Kansas City and say that I expect that in 26 because like we're seeing groups, if I took my entire profit off of a job, still lower than that. So it's just like feasibly, I don't know how they're surviving other than that must be what they're doing to survive. So you could call that kind of like I don't know, a bid bottleneck or a low bid bottleneck that we've
mm,
seen that hasn't typically been in place historically.
that's interesting. Any idea of what's causing that? Why the bids are getting so low? Like, what is causing people to need to survive? Any thought?
I don't know if it's business transition or just desire to be in, maybe it's Kansas City centric with the growth of the market that we're seeing here. We've definitely seen a ton of groups descend from places that we've never seen. We were in Topeka the other day that typically we would have seen six commercial roofers maybe on a bid. There were 25. So it's like there's something in the water. I don't know if there's not enough work to go around or if there's too many businesses that have been established, bought, etc. But we're definitely seeing things that are not sustainable. And I'm sure that'll hurt everybody across the board, but I would expect just a general contraction of some of them to either fold at the bottom or something.
Very
Um,
interesting.
but
Okay.
optimistically, I think we'll start to see, as we talked about at the top, maybe some implementation of tech. I've started to even see some pretty cool robotics on the roofing side that could definitely help if they get it implemented and correct.
I mean, we could have a whole entire conversation about that entire world of robotics, automation, how it impacts the trades. Maybe
Yeah.
we'll do a part two, perhaps.
Yeah. Yeah.
I want to finish off with a bit of a side tangent, but tell me about your sort of recent entrepreneurial journey with the travel agency that you're working on. How did that come up?
Yeah.
Just tell me about that.
Yeah. Somebody that, I kind of had I studied abroad at one point, became an avid traveler in my later years, just kind of while at home as my parents started having us travel a bit more. Expendable income became greater at that point versus when I was really little. So just kind of general exposure to the world, I looked at um, it as something that I wanted us to continue to do, both me and my partner, and with our kids. So we'd been planning a lot of friend travel for probably 5 to 6 years, and we took a big group of about 10, mostly people that had never been outside the country, and we did like a nice Ireland, Scotland, England loop. And I was kind of sitting on the train, and I was like, I think if we can do it with this group, we can probably monetize this for a whole bunch of people. And so, I think for us, it was like, what we plan 3 to 4 trips a year. Maybe we can afford to take another trip as a family, and just put the funds directly towards that. Whereas now it's kind of ballooned word of mouth. It's something fun I get to do with my wife, consistently, and it still doesn't feel like work. So, it's been nice. But yeah, um, I did not expect it to go the direction it's gone. And we now get to learn about travel and different geographies and locations every day, which is pretty fun. I can't tell you how much that has also helped our roofing business because I've gone into so many discussions ready to talk specifics about putting a new roof on, only to have somebody be like, yeah, okay, that's great. Let's talk about, I got a trip coming up. I'd like to talk about this, and then we'll get to that. So,
How about that? Well, that's
yeah.
awesome. Colby, I appreciate you coming on. This was great. Where can people find you? And then who do you want to find you in terms of customers, partners, all that stuff?
Yeah, I really appreciate it, Garrett. Thanks for having me. You can find me on LinkedIn. All my info is really posted there. So, um, email is Colby at howserroofing.com. That's 2 R's. Website is the same. Um, but yeah, if you shoot me a DM via LinkedIn, if we have no other way that we've been connected, I usually find time to respond to those. And then, as mentioned at the top, I'll usually take a meeting with just about anybody, whether you're outside the KC region or here in town and want to link up for coffee or something like that.
Awesome. Thanks so much.
Yeah, thanks, Garrett.